Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next The Promised Neverland anime review. This one's going to be for Season 2, Episode 4. And I suppose we just have to get into it. This is probably the clearest episode of all that the anime is doing things very differently, and I honestly don't really know what they're doing. Have they just skipped over some stuff to accelerate through the story to an insane degree? Or are they just going in their own direction and it just sort of happens to resemble stuff we've seen already because it's the Promised Neverland? It's going to be consistent to some degree. But yeah, I think it's just impossible for anyone who's read the manga, The Promised Neverland, to watch this episode and just be like, yeah, I'm cool with that. I'm cool with what they did here. It's such an extreme change in the story that I just have no clue at this point actually what they're doing or what arc we're actually going into, or in that what happens next. Are we going into one of the arcs that we sort of know about and they've just skipped over some, or is it completely different going forward? Because I think the confusing thing in all of this is that we know the manga writer is involved in the anime and he's like overseeing this. I think we knew going into this season we were going to get some sort of anime original content, but that happens in like every anime where there's always like a scene or two here or there. This is a very, very extreme example. So I think the only time we've ever seen something like this that's a really popular anime was Full Metal Alchemist, and that I think the original anime is not the exact same as the manga, and it splits off at a certain point because at that point the manga wasn't finished, whereas Brotherhood actually covers the manga accurate stuff. Here though, we went into Season 2, the manga was over. The manga's been over for months at this point. I don't really think, like, the content that they should have covered here, they absolutely knew about. So there's no excuses there with regards to why they did this. The other thing is that the content that they've skipped past here is not content that people wanted to be changed all that much. People love this shelter arc going into Goldie Pond arc. It's one of the few sections of The Promised Neverland that I just don't really see get all that much criticism. I understand that in the anime, what everyone wanted them to do as like an anime change is the ending of the overall series whenever we get there. You absolutely need to do work on that to add to it, for sure. I would also say the Kuvitidala arc needed some work as well. Other than that, I still think that the manga hits most of the main points, and if you just added in a few extra little bits, you'd be fine. But they're not doing that here. In that, by my calculations, if they have done what I think they've done here, they have skipped from about the end of Volume 5, early Volume 6, all the way up into like Volume 12. The whole people coming in attacking the shelter, military people with guns attacking the shelter, that happens in the manga. But after a bunch of other stuff has happened, and we sort of knew that it was something that was like coming, and we knew one of the characters, but the focus of that arc is much more emotional because there's much more characters involved because we'd had arcs before then when most of the rest of the cast got introduced. And what's weird about this episode is that the way they did the soldiers finding the place and coming in is, I think, meant to be referencing what happens in the actual manga, because they know about the location of the place and that there's like multiple entrances in, and they do the thing with them at the end where like ultimately the kids are sort of saved by a wild demon coming and like attacking and killing some of the soldiers. That is what happens. They've just like slightly changed it and used it somewhere different. But pacing wise, which pacing is probably one of the problems you can maybe associate with The Promised Neverland, like over the course of its run. Some of the arcs are well paced, some of them not so much. But pacing would be the main criticism you'd level maybe at the series overall. But not at this point, not at this section at all. And what they've replaced it with right now is something that I would consider to be very poorly paced, in that I don't think I've seen something this kind of weirdly paced in a while. Because this episode was like, okay, like the first 2 minutes, I'd say, of the episode were kind of interesting as they kind of brought us up to speed with, like, okay, the phone call, here's the word future, type it into the pen, you need to go over here to D100, there's a mission for you. Great. They all clarify that, okay, we need to get Phil and the others, and then find our way to the human world. That's the overall plan of the series. Fine, that's still relatively accurate to the manga. Then they go into, like, a third of the episode is just this, like, montage of them living in the shelter. Nothing going wrong, just them living in the shelter. Pretty much the same thing they covered in the last episode, just, here they are in the garden, here they are in the bath, here they are eating, and so on. Then they cover them outside, catching food. And look, maybe one thing you can maybe give this is that they are presenting some of the other more minor kid characters as being a little bit more in the spotlight. This character's doing this. These two characters are actually the ones to find this new fish. And again, like, they focus 2-3 minutes of the episode, like a pretty substantial part of the episode, on just, let's introduce this random fish that two of the younger members found, and let's just have, like, a thing where, should we or should we not eat it? We get Ray involved, and we have a bit of a laugh about it. Okay, fine, but, like, why are we doing that in this episode? When there's so much else going on, when this theoretically should have been some of, like, the most important and interesting character moments in the early part of the series, of the kids interacting with the man in the shelter. Yet instead it's just... And this is the weirdest part of this episode. From the fact that we see one of the kids writing a diary, they write, like, January 2047. That means a year has passed. The montage that we saw in this episode is a year passing. That's insane to me. And I say that while acknowledging that even the Promised Neverland manga has a relatively extreme time skip like that happens sort of out of the blue. But it feels like it was placed a lot better in the manga than it is here. Because at least that way, they arrive at the shelter, there's an initial impact and something happening. An arc stems off from that. Then you sort of come back and you can have a bit of a time skip at the shelter. But doing it straight away just feels weird. Especially when you're then going to have the kids have to escape the shelter at this point. Where, like, we only had the shelter for, like, an episode and a bit. What's the point? It's just, I think, really poor use and management of what's going on here. And the question remains, is the man in the shelter and all the characters from the Goldie Pond arc, are they just not in the anime, or are they going to be introduced somewhere else? Because I can see a way where maybe that's one way to do it. That you keep the man in the shelter as a character, and he just happens to be already joined up with all the Goldie Pond crew. And maybe we're going to go there. Like, there's a few things I suppose, like, are going to happen in the anime that are the same as the manga. I won't spoil them here because obviously at this point I don't even know where we're going. Like, are we doing the Goldie Pond arc, like, just in a different spot? Are we doing Kavitadala? Well, we can't do that because they didn't set up any of the Seven Walls stuff. Emma does have the necklace from Mujika, which I suppose is meant to be a key aspect of that, but a lot of the more, like, lore details about that aren't there. And it's like, okay, we learned about William Minerva is actually James Rattray, and that's a nice reveal of, like, what the shelter is for. You still have the writing on the wall, which obviously was slightly changed in the anime, but it's still there. There's still that book that has writing in it, highlighting that other people have been in the shelter. Where are they? What happened? In that, like, that means like remnants of the Goldie Pond arc are still here. I really, really don't get this. This is just a very confusing situation for this anime. And I haven't really seen a reaction of anyone to this episode where it's like, yes, this is better. Because I don't think it is. Because people like the man in the shelter. He's a really good character, and with the arcs that they could have had with him, it is some of your more interesting emotional stuff. Them meeting like an older escaped character from one of the farms is a key part of the story to get that understanding of like someone who was on their own on the outside and had to survive on their own, and how that has changed them, versus Emma, who's brought like most of her family with her. That was a big kind of contrast arc that they kind of had to go into, but now that's gone, and so we're just left with this weird situation where, for the most part, like over the course of the first 3 episodes, they adapted things very accurately, outside of, you know, skipping over some content that maybe isn't particularly important, but otherwise hitting the main points in terms of, we do meet Sanju and Mujika here. They do tell them the core story of, you know, a brief idea of what the world is like, and then they go into the shelter. It's accurate up to that point. Now it's kind of gone completely off the rails, and like within an episode we're already away from the shelter and are going, I guess we have to head to D100, whatever that's going to be. I don't really remember D100 being a point listed, because I'm pretty sure Goldie Pond is meant to be like B08 something or other. Like it's a little bit away, but it's not that far away. There's obviously a section later on in the manga where they do some traveling, and it's very much skipped through quite quickly. So I don't really know. And okay, let's go with the idea that potentially the manga has maybe more problems than we think and needs a lot of changes, and the writer who is involved in this really wants to make the story he truly wanted but couldn't do in the manga. I assume he's not just ruining his own anime, so he is trying to make the anime like this sort of unique version that maybe is more in line with his vision. But how does the guy who wrote it feel that this is better? Like, I just don't get that. And I don't blame anyone who feels like, okay, is this the time to drop the Promised Neverland anime? Because it's just gone off the rails now, it seems. And I'm going to stick with it because I am very interested to see why they've made such a big turn. And I want to see what they're doing next. Like, what is the arc that they are planning to do going forward? Because they do the thing with Isabella in this episode, where she's obviously in prison. Grandma comes to see her, and the demons are like, you know, you're valuable. You've made some of the, you know, the top children, of course. Are you ready to sort of like hunt them down? And she says, yes, she is. It's different in that I don't think this exact scene happens in the manga, but something equivalent happens in terms of, you know, like Isabella saying that, you know, yes, I will join with you to help, you know, get the kids back again. She rejoins the team in a way, the bad side team, despite us having like a little bit of a sympathetic moment with her right as the escape happened, where she lets them go. That this decision she makes here seems like a contrast to the fact that she did actually let them go. Now she's apparently on board to hunt them again, and is going to, I guess, I think Grandma says that she's going to be given her her kind of role back, and she'll be allowed to see the kids again. What are they doing? Like, it's still the core of the Isabella arc, just brought forward much more earlier than they need to do. But if we have truly skipped like 6 volumes or so at this point, maybe we are at this point. But I just don't know. So yeah, very, very questioning of this episode. No clue what they're doing. So in the comments, like, if you have any clue, more detail than I have about what they're actually doing, where you think they're going to go with this, let me know in the comments below. But yeah, I was very excited for the Promised Neverland Season 2. And even after, I'd say, the first 2 episodes, I was like, okay, I think this is going to be good. 3, I had some questions, but confidence that they'll fix it. This one completely has me now thinking like, oh no, what have they done here? And like I said with the whole dropping thing, like, if this goes really bad and we get more episodes like this, where like a third of the episode is like a montage at the shelter and catching some fish, uh, maybe it is the time to just be like, yeah, I'll stick to the manga. I don't really need to watch this. But I wanted the anime to be good because I thought the anime could be the honest improvement over the manga, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen at this point, unless they really blow us away with whenever they get to whatever arc they're actually going to do. But it's been like, what, 2 episodes now, and I don't think we've really seen any character development necessarily. Since we left Sanju and Mujika, there's been no growth or development really with the team. It's just, they're relatively safe in the shelter, but now they're not anymore, and that pacing is just way too quick. Like, at least the way they did it in the manga, you have them in or around the shelter. The shelter is this active location for at least a handful of volumes. It's an active location here for what, one and a bit episodes. That's not really acceptable, I think. So, yeah. I didn't really talk, I suppose, all that much about the specifics of the episode itself, but as a manga reader, to me, the more interesting thing is just how they've gone way off the tracks here with this. So, in the comments, let me know just what are your thoughts on what the anime is doing here. I think it's basically like we barely even need to talk about the episode itself. It is just more about what are they doing. So that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.